On the evening of July 29th, 2014, just after 9 p.m., the sun had long since set, but the air was still stiflingly hot. In an apartment complex in the western city of Pocheon, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, a few elderly residents were still awake, chatting animatedly. Suddenly, faint crying could be heard from the neighboring second-floor apartment. At first, they paid little attention, but as time passed, the crying grew louder and more distinct, impossible to ignore. At 9:40 p.m., concerned neighbors knocked on the door of the adjacent apartment. Despite waiting for some time, no one answered. The crying continued unabated from inside, and they thought they heard a young boy's voice repeatedly calling out, "I want Mom." This surprised everyone, as they knew the apartment's occupant was a woman. To ensure safety, they decided to call the police and fire department. Soon after, authorities arrived at the scene. After several unsuccessful attempts to knock, they considered breaking down the door but found it securely locked. With no other option, they used a ladder to access the second-floor apartment. Inside, the layout was simple. The main door opened into the living room, behind which was a hallway. The kitchen and guest bedroom were on the west side of the hallway, while the master bedroom was on the east. Upon entering, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. Garbage was piled everywhere, with 19 enormous green trash bags nearly as tall as an adult. Flies buzzed throughout the apartment, spreading a nauseating stench. The floor and door frames were rotting and cracks covered the walls. Although the furniture still bore traces of past luxury, it was now covered in thick layers of dust and mold, leaving everything dull and gloomy. It was hard to believe anyone could be living in such conditions. Following the sound of crying, police found a young boy in the master bedroom. He appeared to be about 5 or 6 years old, with a vacant, lifeless gaze. His body was thin and weak, his eyes cloudy and slightly tinted blue. His ribcage was clearly visible, indicating severe malnutrition. Despite the commotion around him, the boy remained lost in his own sorrow, crying while staring blankly at the TV screen, as if it were his only refuge. After a moment, the boy noticed the police presence. His cries suddenly became louder, and his face showed signs of exhaustion. With patience and gentleness, the officers gradually calmed him. When asked why he was alone, he gave only one brief response, but his weakness made his words difficult to understand. Recognizing the boy's poor health condition, the police decided to take him to the nearest Child Protective Services facility. There, the boy was finally able to eat a full meal. However, what surprised everyone was how he handled the food. He meticulously divided it into small portions, each about half the size of a normal serving for a child his age. Though clearly starving to the point of dizziness, he stubbornly adhered to his method of dividing the food. He only ate the smallest portion, as if following some unspoken rule. Witnessing this, everyone felt a mix of heartache and confusion, unable to understand the reason behind the boy's strange behavior. However, the oddities didn't end there. Initially, the police thought the overwhelming stench in the apartment was simply due to the accumulated trash. But as they approached the guest bedroom across from the master bedroom, the odor became exponentially worse. An officer cautiously pushed open the guest bedroom door. Though not large, the room was also filled with garbage. In the center stood an object that immediately caught everyone's attention. A massive red plastic container, about 31.5 inches tall, with a diameter of 33 inches. Next to it lay a mobile phone. The red container stood out starkly amid the chaos, exuding an air of both mystery and dread. Even more striking was the container's lid, weighed down by a large bag of salt weighing about 22 pounds. The police decided to open the container. Inside, they found a purple blanket covering the contents. After carefully clearing the area around it, they slowly lifted the blanket. Instantly, a chill ran down the spine of everyone present. Inside the container was a body in an advanced state of decomposition, submerged in an unidentifiable liquid. The prolonged hot weather had accelerated the decomposition process, making the condition of the body even more horrific. According to officers at the scene, at first glance it resembled a thick porridge or fermented fish paste. After the initial discovery, the police quickly transferred the plastic container to a designated location for a more thorough examination. There, they carefully began to remove the contents. As the liquid drained away, a jumble of human bones gradually appeared before the investigators. But the most shocking moment came when two skulls rolled out of the container. It was then that they realized the horrifying truth. The container held not one, but two victims. Upon closer inspection, they found that the second victim had been placed directly underneath the first, separated only by a thin blanket. This arrangement suggested that the perpetrator had intentionally separated the two bodies, perhaps to prevent them from mixing, or for reasons known only to the killer. Forensic examination revealed that both victims were males, aged between 40 and 50. The victim on top had died about a year earlier. Around his neck were 3 loops of a scarf about 6.5 feet, about 2 meters long, and his face was tightly wrapped in plastic wrap over 3 feet, about 1 meter long. The container was filled with salt, possibly an attempt by the killer to slow decomposition, though clearly ineffective. The lower victim had been dead for over 15 years. The cause of death for both remained a mystery. The mixture of bodily fluids made identification extremely difficult. The only remaining clue was a finger that hadn't fully decomposed, retaining a partial fingerprint. The police immediately commissioned the National Forensic Service to attempt to reconstruct the fingerprint in hopes of identifying the unfortunate victims. This horrifying case sent shockwaves through Pocheon City. An atmosphere of fear and confusion engulfed the community. Pressure mounted on the investigators, who were acutely aware of their responsibility to quickly solve the case, find the perpetrator, and unravel the mysteries behind these two tragic deaths. Without wasting time, the very next day, the Pocheon City Police formed a special investigation team of 60 elite members. Their first task was to thoroughly interview residents living around the apartment where the incident occurred, hoping to find clues about the boy's parents. However, the results only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Most neighbors adamantly claimed they had never seen the boy before. This raised questions about how the child had lived in such seclusion for so long. They only remembered seeing the woman who lived in the apartment about 20 days ago. The neighbors' testimonies also painted a strange picture of this woman. They described her as rarely being at home. Her visits were brief before she would disappear again. The police tracked down the eldest son of the couple, Mr. Park. He revealed that the boy was his half-brother, sharing the same mother but a different father, and that the boy's father had been missing for a long time. He was currently unable to contact his mother. Mr. Park also mentioned that after reaching adulthood, he had moved out of his parents' house to live with his grandparents. He admitted that he had never paid much attention to his younger half-brother, assuming the child had been sent away by their mother. According to the investigation, the boy's mother was Young-sook, 51 years old, who worked at a candy factory. Born in Jonggup City, she suffered from chronic depression and had an unstable personality, which made people reluctant to interact with her. The boy's father was Park Dong-hyun, who worked at a pig farm in Pocheon City. However, his story was a greater mystery. Based on bank statements, medical records, and phone logs, there had been no trace of his existence for the past 15 years, as if he had simply vanished. According to Park Dong-hyun's parents, he had previously had an affair with another woman, and they speculated that he might have run away with her. The SIM card in the mobile phone found next to the plastic container was registered under Park Dong-hyun's name. It had last been used in 2013, a year before the discovery. However, the contact number was that of Young-sook's colleague. This suggested that the actual user of the phone might have been Young-sook herself. If so, why was she using her husband's phone? Due to the severity of the case, the police issued a nationwide warrant for Young-sook on charges of murder and concealment of bodies. Just one day after issuing the warrant, surveillance cameras near Songguri, Pocheon City, captured images of Lee. She appeared to be in a great hurry, leaving work an hour early and quickly departing from the factory. This area was a complex industrial zone, with many foreign workers living in factory dormitories, creating a challenging environment to control. Upon receiving this information, the police immediately deployed forces to the area. They meticulously searched each room in the dormitories and interviewed factory workers. However, despite their efforts, they found no significant leads. Subsequently, they examined Lee's call logs and discovered an unusual pattern. Every day around dawn, Lee would call a mysterious phone number and talk for about 10 minutes. The police believed that the owner of this number might have some relationship with Lee, and where this person lived could be where she was hiding. On August 2nd, police knocked on the door of a textile factory dormitory room in Songgu. A 44-year-old South Asian man opened the door, claiming to be from Sri Lanka. When the police politely asked if they could enter to inspect, the man firmly refused. No matter what the police said, he just shook his head, indicating he didn't understand Korean. After the police presented a search warrant, the man hesitated for a moment before silently pointing towards the kitchen. Lee was hiding there, wearing only underwear, suggesting she had hurriedly hidden. She was then taken to the Pocheon police station. During interrogation, Lee didn't try to hide anything and quickly admitted to killing 2 people. She cried softly, saying, "I was wrong." That same day, the National Forensic Service successfully extracted a fingerprint from a thumb, confirming the identity of one victim as Jung Seung-hoon, 48 years old, who was both Lee's colleague and lover. According to Lee's confession, 2 years earlier in 2012, while working at the candy factory, she had met Jung Seung-hoon. They developed feelings for each other and began an affair. 2 months later, they started dating, often meeting at Jung's house. During this time, Lee demanded that her lover hand over his entire salary. Being deeply in love, Jung agreed without hesitation. However, the candy factory where they worked had strict rules against employees dating colleagues. When the factory director accidentally discovered their relationship and learned that Lee was married, he deemed Jung's character questionable and immediately fired him. Under pressure from the director, in May 2013, Lee was forced to break up with Jung. At this point, Jung had not only lost his job, but also his lover. Faced with this unexpected misfortune, he felt extremely angry and demanded that Lee return his salary to compensate for his losses. But Lee said the money had been used for their life together, so she had no reason to return it. This led to an argument. For the next 2 months, Jung frequently came to the factory to find Lee and demand money. Under pressure, Lee could only borrow from various sources to repay the debt, but it wasn't enough. The relationship between the two deteriorated, and the once loving couple became enemies. Each meeting inevitably led to intense arguments. In July 2013, Jung went to Lee's home in Sinbukmayan, Pocheon City, to reclaim his money. Faced with Jung's persistence, Lee didn't respond immediately, but silently sat down, poured a drink, and offered him one, suggesting they drink together. Although Jung found it strange, he didn't think much of it since he was already there. He drank while continuing to demand repayment. After a few minutes of pleading, Lee finally spoke. She said, "If you keep making a fuss like this, I won't have money to pay you back. If you continue like this, I'll take your life and then do the same to myself." Hearing these words, Jung couldn't contain his anger. He cursed and slapped Lee hard across the face. Unable to bear this humiliation, Lee suddenly stood up and used all her strength to push Jung to the ground. She then sat on top of him, used both hands to choke him, then wrapped a scarf tightly around his neck and squeezed hard. Jung struggled desperately, but his body seemed unresponsive, his limbs weak. Lee, who suffered from depression, relied on sleeping pills to sleep and always carried a few pills with her. At this point, they had silently dissolved in Jung's drink, and by the time Jung realized what was happening, it was too late. Seeing Jung lying motionless, Lee showed no remorse. Instead, she took plastic wrap and tightly wound it around his face multiple times, then wrapped him in a blanket and moved him to the guest bedroom. For a long time after that, she paid no attention to her former lover wrapped in plastic until the body began to decompose. Only then did she retrieve the large plastic container she had used 15 years earlier, put Jung's body inside, placed it on top of the other victim, and poured in a large amount of salt. At this point, the truth about the victim on top in the container had been revealed. As for the other victim, Lee claimed that 15 years ago she had encountered a foreigner with fierce eyes on the street. This person had demanded money from her, but when she refused, a struggle ensued. Eventually, she overpowered and killed the man. Afterward, she found another foreigner on the street and promised to pay him 1,000,000 won, approximately $750, to help her hide a body in the plastic container. But was the truth really as Lee Young-sook had confessed? DNA test results identified the second victim as Park Dong-hyun, 41 years old. He wasn't a robber, nor was he a foreigner, but a native Korean. This person was none other than Lee's husband. When the police questioned Lee again, she changed her story, saying she hadn't done anything to her husband. She claimed that 15 years ago, she woke up one morning to find her husband dead on the balcony. Faced with this sudden shock, she didn't know what to do, and out of love for her husband, she put him in the plastic container, wanting to preserve his memory forever. This statement was clearly unconvincing. The police continued to investigate the couple's past, but the incident had occurred 15 years ago, and there wasn't enough evidence to prove that Lee had killed her husband. On August 7th, the National Forensic Service not only found a small amount of doxylamine in Jung Seung-hoon's body, but, more importantly, also detected a similar substance in Park Dong-hyun's body. Doxylamine is a chemical component in prescription sleeping pills that has a sedative effect, helping people fall into a deep sleep easily. However, if overdosed, it can lead to coma and even death. Based on this new clue, Lee Young-sook, who frequently used sleeping pills and sedatives, became even more suspicious. Investigators also confirmed from pharmacies near Lee's home that she had purchased sleeping pills containing doxylamine 15 years ago. Faced with undeniable evidence, Lee Young-sook admitted to her crimes and recounted the entire story. The timeline goes back to 1985 when Lee was 22 years old and working at a garment factory in Seoul. There, she met Park Dong-hyun, who was a year older than her. She quickly fell into a sweet romance and became pregnant before marriage. A year later, the couple moved to Pocheon City, where Park's parents lived, and officially got married. Soon after, their first child was born, a lovely and charming boy. 3 years later, their second son was born. Park Dong-hyun worked at a pig farm quite far from home. To make commuting easier, after careful consideration, the family of 4 moved in with Park's parents in an apartment in Sinbukmyeon, Pocheon City. Life went on until 6 years later. One day in May 1995, a tragic accident occurred on Highway 325, passing through Sinbukmyeon, Pocheon City. A sand truck overturned and 10 tons of sand poured out, crushing a young boy who was about to cross the road. The boy was Park and Lee's second son. The accident claimed the 6-year-old boy's life on the spot. The tragedy of losing a child created an irreparable shock for Lee Young-sook's family. This heartbreaking event left deep scars in her soul, leading to severe mental breakdown. As a result, she was diagnosed with depression, a condition that forced her to rely on sleeping pills and sedatives to get through long, painful nights. The marital relationship also began to crack from this point. Lee blamed her husband for their son's death, claiming he hadn't taken proper care of the child. The husband, in turn, blamed Lee. Their arguments became more frequent, leading to a decline in Lee's physical and mental health. 5 years after the accident, she even had to undergo major surgery for a ruptured blood vessel in her face. With each argument with his wife, Park grew to resent his family more. He began to frequently stay out late and not come home to sleep. This situation became particularly serious in 2003, with times when he wouldn't come home for months. It was during this period that he met another woman and had an affair. When Lee found out about the affair, her depression worsened, and her resentment towards her husband deepened. To retaliate against her husband's betrayal, from 2003, she frequently went to Songguri River in Pocheon City to seek out foreign men and date them. She wanted to let herself go to escape reality. By the fall of 2004, Lee wanted to escape her current life. She decided to give her husband a large amount of water laced with sleeping pills and blood pressure medication, deceiving him by saying it was medicine for nasal inflammation. As a result, her husband was poisoned and died. Watching her husband pass away right before her eyes, Lee showed no emotion. She calmly wrapped the body in a blanket and put it in the plastic container. After her husband's death, Lee skillfully concealed the truth by offering various reasons to explain Park's absence. She even fabricated a story about Park running away with another woman. This strategy not only helped her avoid suspicion, but also inadvertently made her in-laws feel guilty towards their daughter-in-law. As a result, they proactively cut off contact with Lee, unwittingly allowing her to continue concealing her crime. Subsequently, Lee continued to live a promiscuous lifestyle, having affairs with numerous men. Neighbors frequently saw her coming and going with different men, constantly changing partners. In 2006, she gave birth to a boy at Uijeongbu Street, Mary's Hospital in Gyeonggi. The father of the child was neither Jung Seung-hoon nor the Sri Lankan man, but a man from Bangladesh. Lee showed no anticipation or joy at the birth of the child. She frequently neglected to care for her son, failing to fulfill her responsibilities and duties as a mother. In 2013, not wanting to continue living in debt and being pursued by creditors, she killed Jung Seung-hoon, her former lover and creditor. For a year after committing the crime, she rarely returned to the apartment, leaving the boy there alone. She would occasionally return to give the boy some food, usually bread and milk hastily bought from a convenience store. From birth until he was 8 years old, the boy's life was confined within 4 walls, with no friends and no social interaction. Lee Young-sook was the only person the boy ever met. As a result, neighbors were unaware of the boy's existence. The poor boy was constantly hungry, sometimes starving, sometimes fed. Due to malnutrition, he was much shorter than other children his age. Despite being 8 years old, he was only as tall as a 5 or 6-year-old child. His only companions were a TV, a phone that could only make calls, a pile of garbage, and 2 decomposing bodies. Watching TV became his only joy and pastime. This also explains why the boy's eyes had a pale blue tint when the police found him. Experts suggest this condition could be due to the boy living in a dimly lit room for an extended period. Regarding the Sri Lankan man who had hidden Lee, the police initially suspected him of possibly aiding Lee in her crimes. However, they later ruled him out as a suspect. This man had come to South Korea to work at a textile factory for 6 months and was not in a position to commit the crime. Although he initially didn't cooperate with the investigation, he eventually revealed Lee Young-sook's hiding place. The prosecution decided not to press charges against him. In February 2015, this shocking case was brought to trial at the Uijeongbu District Court. The defendant, Lee Young-sook, was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of concealing bodies. The prosecutor argued that despite the defendant's depression, considering her long-term concealment of the victims and the mistreatment of her son, a severe punishment was unavoidable. The initial verdict found Lee Young-sook guilty on all charges and sentenced her to 24 years in prison. Not accepting the initial verdict, Lee decided to appeal, completely changing her testimony. She now claimed that her husband, Park Dong-hyun, had died of natural causes. She said she had only placed him in the plastic container. Lee's eldest son, 28-year-old Park, who had previously told the police that his father had been missing for 15 years, suddenly changed his statement as well. He said his father had actually died from illness 15 years ago, and he had helped his mother put the body in the plastic container for preservation. If Lee did this out of love for her husband, what was Park's motive for participating? With Park's consent, the police conducted a lie detector test. Surprisingly, he was not lying. Notably, Park admitted to helping his mother hide his father because in South Korea, the statute of limitations for the crime of concealment is 7 years, while Park Dong-hyun had died 15 years ago. Therefore, even if he confessed, he couldn't be prosecuted. Additionally, although doxylamine was found in Park Dong-hyun's body, the exact dosage couldn't be determined accurately and might not have been enough to cause death. Consequently, the evidence to convict Lee Young-sook was not strong enough. In September 2015, the appeal trial was held at the Seoul High Court. The judge considered factors such as Lee Young-sook's poor health, mental instability, the unclear cause of Park Dong-hyun's death, and the lack of concrete evidence pointing to Lee Young-sook as the killer. The act of killing Jung Seung-hoon and concealing the body was confirmed. To overturn the initial verdict, the appeal court declared one of the two murder charges against the defendant unfounded, reducing the sentence from 24 years to 18 years in prison. However, Young-sook was still dissatisfied with the verdict and continued to appeal. 4 months later, the South Korean Supreme Court upheld the appeal court's decision. The judge reasoned that Young-sook's bizarre act of concealing her husband's body after his death was due to her suffering from impulsive personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. Therefore, procedurally, the act of concealing the body couldn't be considered concrete evidence that she had murdered Park Dong-hyun. This case sparked intense public reaction after the sentencing. Many questioned the court's decision, arguing that the punishment was too lenient. Although Young-sook genuinely suffered from depression, she had intentionally taken 2 lives and abused her son. The court's verdict seemed to focus too much on the process of the events, while somewhat neglecting the actual consequences of the criminal acts. Some opinions suggested that Young-sook did not act alone. According to her testimony, when she strangled Jung Seung-hoon, he couldn't resist because he had been drugged. However, the strength difference between men and women, especially in life or death situations, is significant. Strong survival instincts could have caused him to struggle and resist. Jung had a robust build, weighing nearly 220 pounds, and for a woman to move him into the plastic container alone would certainly have been a difficult task. Therefore, her son might have been involved in this incident. And that's it for today. What do you think about this case? Share it in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next videos.